Hey everybody, welcome back to Chase's Sports News. I am your host, Chase Coburn. Here on Chase's Sports News, we are previewing each of the 32 NFL team seasons before things get started. And today we preview the Los Angeles Rams' upcoming season with a very special guest, their ESPN NFL reporter, Sarah Barshop. Sarah, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad you're here. It's obviously amazing to have you here. I know you just wrapped up mini camp in Hawaii. How was that?
Unbelievable. It was cool, to be covering something that no other NFL team has ever done. And then obviously no complaints about the location. It was absolutely beautiful. But then to see some of the players interact with fans who live in Maui, who maybe just have never had this experience. There's no professional sports teams there. So I heard from a lot of fans and a lot of people there how cool that connection was.
Right.
And then, like I said, there are worse places to be covering football.
Absolutely. I saw all those clips when you were on Sports Center, and I think everyone was a little jealous of you being there in Hawaii, but obviously a really cool experience. I mean, you get to cover in LA anyway, so it's not a terrible place to cover. Sarah, let's talk about this football team a little bit. I mean, last year they started off 1-4, though they kind of responded in that final 2/3 of the season, won the NFC West, made the divisional round, unfortunately lost there, but gave Philly probably its toughest test of the whole playoffs, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. What do we really learn about that team a year ago from their response starting 1-4, then obviously playing Philly close in the playoffs?
To me, it said that they may be a young team. Obviously, the last two rookie classes have been very good, so they're a very young team. But also that they were prepared to make this playoff run, a very tight team. Now, Sean McVay likes to talk about you kind of start again every year. No two teams are exactly the same. But I think it tells you that they are a team primed to make another playoff run. If anything, they've made some moves this offseason, but I think they've added to this team. And so I'm curious to see whether they can get away from the very slow starts they've had the last 2 years. And if they can turn that into a strong season rather than needing to, finish strong at the end of the year to make a playoff run.
I mean, you even talked about the slow starts. We even saw that slow start in 2022 after the Super Bowl. They just weren't able to make that second half response and get back into the playoffs. So definitely, I think that's going to be a key for this team. You mentioned some of the moving parts last offseason. Which do you feel were the biggest departures and which do you feel were the biggest additions from this past spring?
I think you look at that wide receivers room. Obviously, Cooper Kupp leaving, signing Davante Adams. Be very curious how Sean McVay runs his offense. Also, they had drafted a tight end with their first pick. They've got 3 tight ends on the roster. So I think I'll be curious to see what this offense looks like. And a big part of that is what Davante Adams can do. Is he the Davante Adams that we saw with the Packers, that we've seen in stretches? Because if that's the case, he and Puka Ngata on the field together, I think will be a lot of fun to watch.
Obviously, I feel like the Cooper Kupp and Puka Ngata duo, we didn't really see what they possibly could be. Kupp just kind of maybe regressing a little bit, dealing with some injury problems since his historic 2021 season. Now, obviously, you've been around the team. You've been around the fan base. You've covered this team for a little while now. Obviously, Cooper Kupp kind of already a legend in LA for what he did a few years ago. When he left, what was kind of the response from the team and kind of the fan base you feel as a whole?
I think from the fan base, it was a sadness because of the joy he brought in 2021. However, I do think that you look at the injury history and it's hard not to say, maybe this just isn't the right place with him as the wide receiver 1. Doesn't mean he's not going to have a good season in Seattle. And that's kind of what I've heard from people with the team. They're not saying he's never going to be a good wide receiver again, but just the way that Sean McVay wanted to go forward with his offense. I mean, clearly he didn't think that having Cooper Kupp in that position was the right thing. And then, some decisions you make because of money too. He was going to count for quite a bit against the salary cap. So, no one in LA was happy to see him gone. That's for sure, whether that's the fans, whether that's the team. But I think there was an acknowledgement of, you look at the offense the last 3 years, and last year, one of the big things Sean McVay said is that it wasn't consistent. Now, part of that is due to some injuries, but when someone does have an injury history, I think that's something you have to take into account. So I think it'll be clear pretty early on what this offense looks like. I know a lot of people in that locker room are still cheering Cooper Kupp on, except for the 2 games a year that they play the Rams.
Let's talk about Puka Ngata a little bit. Obviously, he had that historic rookie season in 2023, nearly 1,500 yards, 6 touchdowns, and over 100 receptions. Last year, missed some time, so kind of an asterisk on the season. But overall, it didn't feel like he was as productive maybe as he was, or maybe just as much. Do you feel Puka Ngata is still going to be at that elite wide receiver level in year 3?
So it's interesting. I mean, I think the answer to that question is yes, but I don't know. I mean, when you look at stats, maybe he doesn't have a better year statistically. And I think if that's the case for the Rams, that might be a good thing because it means that you have two wide receiver ones. I think if you have a more balanced offense with Davante Adams and Puka Ngata, and Tutu Atwell, and some of the depth that they're working to get in that receivers room, I
Right.
think that's a good thing for them. Part of the reason Puka Ngata has this historic rookie season is because Cooper Kupp's hurt for part of it. If Matthew Stafford can look to Cooper first, Puka Ngata is probably never in that position if the Rams are as healthy as they hope to be. So maybe the stats won't be there again. A big thing, you can't predict injury, but I do think that it's not necessarily an awful thing for the Rams if he doesn't have the numbers he had up, his rookie season.
It felt like that 2023 you kind of had these players who kind of went from nothing to something, and that was Puka Ngata, and that was also Kyron Williams, who I believe is one of the more underrated players in the National Football League, and he once again put together an incredible campaign. But I'm also high on Blake Corum, and I feel like if you're the Rams, you want to get him involved in the offense as well. How do you see Sean McVay and this Rams coaching staff really utilizing the two running backs?
It's interesting. I actually think the running back they drafted, Hunter. Now, I'll say this: the thing about Kyron Williams and Blake Corum is people on the coaching staff and in the front office have described them as very similar backs. Which,
Right.
if Kyron Williams is injured, as he had been earlier in his career, it's a great thing because you can just slot Blake Corum in. Now, if Kyron Williams is playing as well as he did last year, you don't necessarily want to take him off the field for someone who kind of fills the same role. Now, I do think there'll be a little bit more rotating just because the Rams might need to see what life is like after Kyron Williams, if that is the case, if they don't get a deal done this offseason before the season starts. But I could see, it's a pretty crowded running back room. And the stat I saw during the draft was that they have drafted a running back, I think, 8 years in a row. So Sean McVay is a big fan of adding running backs through the draft. So I think you maybe see a little bit more rotation, but it's hard to take Kyron Williams off the field if he's playing as well as he did last year.
And obviously, you pair him alongside Matthew Stafford in the backfield, and obviously the Rams are elite. And I think that's what's keeping them a prominent contender is that Matthew Stafford is once again under center, and it feels in this modern day of the National Football League only a handful of teams can truly win a Super Bowl because I feel like you need an elite quarterback under center to really take charge. And I think there's an argument to be made that Stafford's still one of the 5 best signal callers in the league. The Rams were able to keep him in tow, allow him to stay after the contract restructure. What should fans expect, though, from Stafford this year, given the fact that he's 37 years old?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the one thing about as you age is maybe you're more susceptible to injury, and that's something you can't predict. He obviously takes care of his body. He's talked about what he's done this offseason, and he knows that he jokes all the time about, he's not the guy who came in as a rookie. And in some ways he said that's a good thing. But I think if he can stay healthy, I don't see why you don't see the Matthew Stafford you saw toward the end of the year. If their wide receivers can stay healthy, if Sean McVay's offense is able to play the way he wants to and is able to find more consistency, obviously that a lot is with Matthew Stafford. But after games where maybe Stafford didn't have the line that stood out there, you'd still hear Sean McVay saying, yeah, that wasn't necessarily on Matthew. So I think the Rams fans should be very happy that Matthew Stafford is back because no doubt that toward the end of the last year, he was playing like a top quarterback in the NFL.
Overall, you look at this team, you look at the competition they're going to face. This team is once again viewed as a Super Bowl contender, though they haven't gotten back to the NFC Championship game since they won that Super Bowl. What's going to kind of be the biggest hurdle in their way that they'll have to get over to once again get back to the big game?
So I think there are two things. I think one, you have to look at the offensive line. Going into, even a couple months ago, it looked like going to be a very strong unit. Now with Alaric Jackson missing time, likely due to blood clots, that they just signed him to a 3-year deal. They were counting on him to be, a very important part in protecting Matthew Stafford. And so I think it still remains to be seen how much time he's going to miss if he misses time. But that's one thing I think they need to figure out, that offensive line. And then two, it's the growth of this defense. A big reason they made that playoff run at the end of this last year is because of the pass rush was so good, but it was Chris Shula getting this very young defense, a team, a part of the team that a lot of people thought was going to be a weakness of this team. They won games for the Rams last year down the stretch, especially. So can they take another step forward, or do they regress because, they're a younger team and maybe don't have that experience? I think those are two things that I'm looking at about this team going into training camp. And whatever the answer to those two questions will be, I think will have a big part into whether this Rams team is a Super Bowl contender.
Obviously, I feel like you look in the National Football League and you say, look, if you have a head coach and a quarterback that has won before, you could trust them to win again. This is almost a completely different core, though, than we saw a few years ago. Obviously, Aaron Donald, a vital part of that defense. He's not there. Obviously, again, Cooper Kupp, when he was having that historic season, was that top pass catching option. He's not there anymore either. So this is a little bit of a different team. They're younger, as you mentioned, and I'm excited to see how they maybe work through those growing pains in another contending year under the McVay, Stafford regime. Real quick, let's take a look at the schedule. I think the Rams have one of the more interesting schedules in the league. Right now, obviously, we're still weeks away from even training camp starting, let alone the beginning of the season. This is kind of a tentative win-loss that I have right now for this Rams team. Obviously playing a first-place schedule, but it's only the 17th hardest in the league, so kind of middle of the pack. Nothing to be kind of afraid of. They do have 5 standalone games, one of which that Week 7 game in London against what feels like right now to be the London Jaguars with the amount of times they play there every single year. Just what stands out to you from this Rams schedule, just looking at it? Does 10-7 you think seem reasonable for a team like Los Angeles?
You know what? I thought that the last year before they got off to the slow start. So we'll see. But I do think one thing that stood out to me when the schedule came out was that Week 8 bye week. Yes, it's coming off a London game, but they have a very East Coast heavy or Eastern time zone heavy schedule. I think they travel the second farthest maybe to only the Chargers in the NFL this year. And so that's going to be a big challenge for them. And then I also look at those 2 primetime games, Week 16 and 17 at Seattle and then at Atlanta will be key too if they're trying to make a playoff run or try to win the division down the stretch. I see that you have the splitting with the 49ers. I think I've seen a lot of people think that maybe the 49ers won't be very good this year. I actually think, especially playing a last place schedule, I think that's going to be maybe a sneaky team in the division. So I think they will be good. I don't know that which order the wins will happen, because last year I don't think we could have predicted that they started off 1-4. But yes, I think this is a team that, when healthy, is very capable of winning 10 games this season.
I think what's interesting, too, is we're talking about how the Rams can probably not afford to get off to another slow start, because it's what you're talking about, too, like what we've seen with Cincinnati. How many times can you overcome just this, terrible start where you're toward the bottom of the league? And I think the fact that you have the Texans, who have made back-to-back divisional rounds, the Eagles, the reigning champs, the Niners, who have been to NFC Championship games when healthy, and then a Baltimore team that is always a contender year to year, and that game's in Baltimore, to have all 4 of those games in the first 6 weeks, I feel like we're going to learn a lot about this Los Angeles team early and learn, are they the same team in previous years, or are they going to step it up? Are they going to play better going into that bye week and position themselves well for the rest of the year? And then you mentioned that final stretch. That is a brutal stretch to me, on the road at a division opponent. Detroit, a Seahawk team, again, a division opponent. At Atlanta, a team that should be improved, and then ending your season against Arizona, a team that could be fighting for their life also for a playoff position. That's a tough way to end. And I like that you mentioned those 2 primetime games as well, because that Seahawks game is on Thursday Night Football. That Falcons game is on Monday Night Football. You have to hope, even though they're both on the road, that the Rams can pick up a win in that Week 17 game, given the fact that they kind of have a mini bye there in between. So these many things like that are obviously so critical when you look at the season, and obviously that Week 8 bye, one of the best, I think, bye positions to have kind of midway through the season, especially when you look at the early portion of the schedule. So a lot makes sense there. I think 10-7 probably sounds reasonable. We'll have to see what happens. And I do believe that this division is going to be one of the tougher ones in football. I think this will be Kyler Murray. I don't want to say breakout season, because he's still been a solid quarterback, but I think that we're going to see Arizona maybe take the next step this year. San Francisco's a contender when healthy, in my opinion. And then we'll see what Seattle does now with Sam Darnold under center. So this is definitely one of the toughest divisions in football. I always say, if you're a contender in a tough division, if you split with your division opponents, I think you're okay. If you go 3-3 in the division and hope you can get 7 wins elsewhere, that should get you into the playoff picture. So if you're Los Angeles, I think that's how you have to look at things here. What are kind of your thoughts on just overall this NFC West, with, again, talking about the 49ers possibly improving, as well as the Seahawks and Cardinals?
I know some people are, it sounds like you are high on the Cardinals. I think I have to see it to believe it, just because of the way they faded down the stretch, the way they did last year too. I think it'll be the Rams and the Niners kind of battling it. I don't know that Seattle has improved from last year. I guess we'll have to see what Darnold looks like. But to me, it's the Rams, I think, of a good team. And I think the 49ers, especially because they're playing this 4th place schedule. And I think They're still a good team, like you said, when healthy. So those are kind of the two teams I see battling it out, but I think it'll be a fun division to watch this year.
It certainly will. I am excited to see how things do shape out. Look, we've seen this Rams team become a Super Bowl winner, but as I mentioned, they haven't gone back to the NFC Championship game since that season. What is it going to take this year? You mentioned some of the hurdles. What is it going to take this year for them to get over the hump when you think about a very competitive NFC with, Philadelphia and other teams possibly standing in their way?
I think it's that consistency that Sean McVay was looking for on offense last year. I mean, it came up almost every single week, and he would say, like, I know I just said this, but, we've got to be more consistent. You look at that game against the Bills last year, one of the best offensive games, we'd seen the Rams play. And so, look, you're not going to score. I think they scored 48 points that game. Not going to see that every week, but certainly they're hoping that they don't have some of, even though in bad weather, the games like they played, the 49ers late in the season, the Jets, those kind of games need to have a more consistent offense, because if the defense doesn't does regress even a little bit, you probably can't depend on them in the same way they did down the stretch, as the defense played very, very well to end the season.
Sarah Barshop, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited for Los Angeles Rams football season. They will once again be one of the top contenders in the National Football League if things do go well, and they'll once again look to capture that Super Bowl. We appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
It's great to be on. Thank you for having me.
Of course, we're going to wrap this one up here. Hope you guys did enjoy here, as again, we are going to preview all 32 NFL team season with a team reporter going into the season. Just stay tuned. That's going to be the Rams and many more to come here on Chase's Sports News. Again, Sarah, thank you so much. We're going to sign off here from Chase's Sports News. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long. We'll see what the Rams can do in 2025.